Hello everyone, welcome to EduTap and welcome to today's Finance 360-degree session, which is going to be very important for all of you who are preparing for the RBI examination, right? So today we are going to discuss a very important scheme of the Reserve Bank of India, and from this scheme there was a direct question that we have seen in the RBI Grade B examination that was conducted recently. So this is a very important scheme of the Reserve Bank of India, that is the internal ombudsman scheme of RBI, and we are going to have the complete understanding of this scheme. So yes, it is going to be a little lengthy, maybe 30 minutes I will be taking, but we will be covering the whole of the scheme in the detailed manner so that you have all the points that are required from this scheme. Okay, so as you know that a direct question has been asked from this scheme in this RBI Grade B examination. So this schemes become very important from the examination perspective, and RBI keeps on asking the questions from its scheme. So anyway, the RBI schemes are important. Okay, so let's get started. Good morning to everyone and welcome to the session. So let's get started without any delay. So do subscribe to the YouTube channel of EduTap so that you continue getting these relevant videos, and do join our Telegram channel, because in the Telegram channel you will get the PDF of the session. So give me a thumbs up if everything is fine, if I am clearly audible and visible, and good morning to everyone. So just give me a thumbs up if everything is good. Okay. So starting with the internal ombudsman scheme. So what is the requirement of internal ombudsman? First of all, I hope you know about the internal grievance redressal. Internal grievance redressal. So what happens that the banks, let's say SBI, State Bank of India, or let's say PNB or any bank. So the banks, let's say any customer, Ram, Shyam, they have some complaints against the SBI in regards to the services that they are providing or the deficiency of services, or there are some complaints that the Ram and Shyam has against the SBI. Now Ram and Shyam are going to the SBI and filing the complaint to the SBI itself so that the SBI can see to those complaints and can resolve that complaints or can answer to Ram and Shyam that why they are not getting the required services, why they are being left out. Okay, so they will raise the complaint to the SBI. Now SBI, there is a department in SBI that looks after the complaints, but let's say SBI is rejecting the complaints. SBI has rejected the complaints of Ram and Shyam. So Ram and Shyam are very sad because their complaints have been rejected wholly or partially. So now Ram and Shyam can go to the RBI ombudsman. Now RBI is saying that if many of the complaints are getting rejected by the banks, so many of the people will have to take the help of the RBI ombudsman. So rather than that, RBI said that all the banks, we will see that there are some criteria that all the applicable banks, they will have to have an internal ombudsman. They will have to have an internal ombudsman within their organization, so that if they are rejecting the complaints, that rejected complaints will be reviewed by the internal ombudsman, and if the complaints are valid, the internal ombudsman will tell the team that is the looking after the complaints to look after the complaint again and to resolve this complaint. So this is the internal ombudsman that we are going to discuss in length now. So RBI in May 2015 advised all the public sector and select private and foreign banks to appoint internal ombudsman as an independent authority. So it was said to the banks that they need to appoint the internal ombudsman as an independent body, as an independent authority to review the complaints that are partially or wholly rejected by the respective banks. So let's say SBI, PNB, ICICI Bank, they are rejecting some complaints. So the wholly rejected complaints or the partially rejected complaints will be reviewed by the internal ombudsman, and if the internal ombudsman says the rejected complaints will be looked will again be taken by the bank. Okay, so it was said that the rejected or wholly or partially rejected complaints will be reviewed by the internal ombudsman that will be hired by the banks. So I hope you have got the brief idea that RBI in May 2015 advised all the public sector and select private sector and the foreign banks to appoint the internal ombudsman to strengthen the internal grievance mechanism. Because if the SBI at the bank level or the different banks at the bank level, they are able to resolve more and more complaints, so less and less people will go to the RBI. So when the banks are able to resolve the complaints itself by the bank or by the internal ombudsman of the bank, so that means the internal grievance redressal mechanism is strong for the banks. So RBI is saying that the banks will have to hire the internal ombudsman so that if the complaints are getting rejected, so there will be a review that will be done. So that inside the bank itself, the complaints are getting resolved and the internal grievance mechanism will be made stronger so that the people do not have to go to the RBI ombudsman. That is the alternate grievance redressal mechanism. Okay. So when the SBI in itself, the banks by themselves are resolving the complaints and through the internal ombudsman they are resolving the complaints. So that is internal grievance redressal. So I hope this is clear. So with the objective to strengthen their internal grievance redressal system, so it was said that the banks have to employ the internal ombudsman, and in 2018 there were the guidelines that were released. So these were the Reserve Bank has introduced internal ombudsman scheme 2018 for the scheduled commercial banks. So in 2015 there was the advice that was given to the banks that kindly hire the internal ombudsman so that your internal grievance redressal mechanism can be made stronger, so that there is the review system that is happening for the rejected complaints. Now in 2015 it was just a advice. In 2018 there were the guidelines that were released that there should be an internal ombudsman in the respective banks. Okay, that was all the scheduled commercial banks that were having 10 or more branches, excluding the regional rural banks. So for these particular banks it was said that they need and they have to employ the internal ombudsman so that their internal grievance redressal mechanism can be stronger. So internal ombudsman mechanism was set up with a view to strengthen the internal grievance redressal system of the banks, so that within the banks, if they are rejecting the complaint, that rejected complaints can be reviewed and then the bank can resolve the complaints. If the rejected complaints are actually valid, internal ombudsman has reviewed it and internal ombudsman has said that these complaints are valid, so kindly resolve it. Okay. And to ensure that the complaints of the customers are redressed at the level of bank itself by an authority placed at the highest level of the bank's grievance redressal mechanism. Okay, to minimize the need for going to the RBI ombudsman. So this is the idea. Gradually the framework has been extended to other regulated entities. So in 2018 there was the internal ombudsman scheme that was released for implementation by banks. Then in 2019, there was the internal ombudsman scheme that was released for non-bank system participants. Non-bank system participants, who are they? Yes. So non-bank system participant, who are they? So non-bank system participant means any person other than a bank that is participating. So your PhonePe, Amazon Pay, Paytm, that is 197 Communications that has Paytm. So Paytm, MobiKwik. So these are the entities that are the non-bank system participant, because non-bank system participant is any entity other than a bank participant in a payment system as defined under Section 2 of Payment and Settlement System Act of 2007, including a system provider. So these entities, the Paytm, the MobiKwik, they are the system providers. They are providing the prepaid instruments, the wallets and such. Okay. So non-bank system participant, they are any entity other than the bank who are involved or who are the system providers who are providing for the transactions for the payment settlement. Okay. So this is the idea. So internal ombudsman scheme was also applicable for the non-bank system participant. It was released in 2019. Then there was the scheme, that is the appointment of internal ombudsman scheme, that was released for the non-bank financial companies in 2021. Then at last the RBI released the RBI Credit Information Companies Internal Ombudsman Directions in 2022. Now you can understand that whenever RBI has released multiple directions for the multiple different entities, then the RBI is always trying to harmonize the directions. So what happened that the guidelines on the internal ombudsman framework that were in operation for various different regulated entities, they were having the similar design, because the credit information companies, let's say they are rejecting some complaint. So they will have an internal ombudsman that will review this rejected complaint, and if the complaint are valid and it is wrongfully rejected, then the internal ombudsman will ask the credit information company to resolve it. Okay. So this is the similar structure that the banks follow. This is the similar structure that the non-bank system participants have to follow, and this is the similar structure that any entity will follow under the RBI. Now the design is same, but there were operational difference that were present, but there was certain variation on the operational matters, because there were different guidelines that were released on different time periods. So there was some difference in the operational matters, then that when the what will be the timeline of the internal ombudsman, what will be the tenure, how the appointment will happen. So there was certain variation on the operational matters. So based on the learnings from the implementation of the existing internal ombudsman guidelines, it was decided to harmonize the guidelines and issue a consolidated master direction that will be followed. So master direction was released, Master Direction, Reserve Bank of India Internal Ombudsman for Regulated Entities, Directions 2023. So in 2023, December 2023, there were the guidelines that were released for the internal ombudsman. That is, and these guidelines became the master directions that all the entities now have to follow these directions. So RBI issued the master direction of Reserve Bank of India Internal Ombudsman for Regulated Entities to harmonize the instructions that is applicable to the various regulated entities. So now you can understand that all these directions were removed, they were updated, and there was a single directions that came into being, that was the harmonized master direction that all the regulated entities will have to follow as applicable. So credit information companies, NBFCs, non-bank system participants, the banks, they all, whoever is under the applicability, they all have to follow this master direction, which has the harmonized guidelines, which has the similar guidelines for the internal ombudsman for any entity. Okay, so this is the idea. I hope it is clear that there were different directions that were applicable to different entities. Now RBI said that we are bringing a master direction that will be applicable to all the entities, and the previous guidelines were removed. Now coming to the directions. So in exercise of powers conferred by Banking Regulation Act, because these directions are for the banks, these directions are for the credit information companies, these directions are for the non-bank system participants that come under Payment and Settlement Act of 2007, okay, and these directions are also for NBFCs. So that's why there are different acts under which the RBI has got the power to make this master direction. So RBI, being satisfied that it is necessary in the public interest to do so, hereby issue the directions. So what are the directions that we are going to discuss? So these directions are issued with a view to strengthen the internal grievance redressal mechanism within the regulated entities and ensure a proper and speedy resolution of customer complaints through the internal grievance mechanism by reviewing the rejected complaints, okay, through the internal ombudsman. So these directions integrate and update the erstwhile different guidelines that is released for different entities. So the different guidelines, the different directions that are released for different entities, it has been integrated and updated, and the master direction has been released. Now who all, like what is the applicability? So first of all, do all banks have to have the internal ombudsman, even the very small banks? No, only all the scheduled commercial banks that are having 10 or more banking outlets in India, whether such bank is incorporated in India or outside India. So all the scheduled commercial banks, whether they are the foreign banks or Indian banks, if they are having 10 or more branches, 10 or more banking outlets, then they need to have the internal ombudsman, excluding the regional rural banks. Only the regional rural banks are excluded. Now NBFCs, all the NBFCs, do they need to have the internal ombudsman? No, only the NBFCs that are fulfilling the following criteria. That is, it is a deposit taking NBFCs. It is taking the deposit from the public with 10 or more branches. So you can understand that the deposit taking NBFCs that are connected with the public, that are taking the deposit of the public, so public must have some complaints against the NBFC that the NBFC have to resolve. So only those NBFCs that are taking the deposit, that is having 10 or more branches, and the non-deposit taking NBFCs with asset size of rupees 5,000 crore and above, that are having public customer interface, that are connected with the public in any manner through this public customer interface. All the NBSPs, that is all the non-bank system participants with more than 1 crore prepaid payment instruments like PhonePe, MobiKwik, Paytm, they have the wallets. They provide the wallets. Wallets are the prepaid payment instrument. You are transferring the money from your bank account to the wallet, and then through this digital wallet you are paying the different merchants. Okay. So if any entity, that is the non-bank system participant, with more than 1 crore of the prepaid payment instruments outstanding, that is currently working as on March 31st, 2023 or thereafter, however, the scheme shall continue to be applicable even if the number of prepaid payment instrument falls below 1 crore on a later date. So it will be seen that as on this date, it was seen that who or which company, which non-banking system participant has more than 1 crore or more than 1 crore, we can say with more than 1 crore of prepaid payment instrument. So whichever company, whichever non-bank system participant had more than 1 crore of the prepaid payment instrument of the wallets, so these companies, let's say Paytm, PhonePe, so these companies will come under the master action and will have to hire the internal ombudsman. But let's say on a later date, the prepaid payment instruments are falling to 99 lakhs or 99.5 lakhs and such, but still they will have to have the internal ombudsman, because it is said that if on a later date the prepaid payment instruments are falling, still the guidelines of the internal ombudsman has to be followed. Okay. Now all the credit information companies, so in the case of credit information companies, all the credit information companies will have to follow the master direction. So I hope till now everything is clear. Give me a thumbs up if everything is clear. So any regulated entity subsequent to the issue of these directions reaching the threshold, let's say a bank, when the master action was released, then the bank only had 5 banking outlets, but now the bank is expanding and this particular bank has got 10 or more banking outlets. So on a later date also you are getting under the applicability, so you will have to start following the directions. So that is the idea. Okay. Now the Reserve Bank, if it is satisfied in public interest, may by order direct any regulated entity to appoint an internal ombudsman, even if they are not coming under the applicability. Still, if the RBI wants, the RBI can make any entity under the NBFC domain, non-bank system participant domain, banks domain, or under the domain of like CICs are already under this applicability. So under any of the entities, like RBI can make the internal ombudsman applicable to them. Okay. So Reserve Bank, if it is satisfied in the public interest, may by order direct any regulated entity to appoint an internal ombudsman as per the directions. So this is the applicability that you have to remember, and the direct question was from in your RBI Grade B examination that was recently conducted. The direct question was from your this part, the applicability of the NBFCs. Okay. So we will discuss that today's topic, why I have picked this topic. We will discuss this at the end. Let's continue for now. Okay. So appointment of internal ombudsman. So the internal ombudsman shall either be a, now appointment of internal ombudsman, there are some criterias for appointing the internal ombudsman. It's not like that you are walking on the road and just you are taking less salary, so you will be hired as an internal ombudsman. No, for the internal ombudsman there are some criterias for appointment. So the internal ombudsman shall be retired or serving officer in the rank equivalent to a general manager of another bank or another credit information company or another NBFC. So let's say that XYZ person has to be hired as an internal ombudsman in a bank, that is SBI. So the internal, if you want to hire this person as the internal ombudsman, so this person should have the general manager equivalent post as a serving officer or retired officer in any other bank or in any other entity other than the SBI. That means that the same person should not have served in SBI, otherwise there is a direct connection between the person and the bank. So there might not be consumer benefit that might happen. So internal ombudsman shall either be a retired or serving officer in the rank equivalent to a general manager of another bank or another financial sector regulatory body or another NBSP. So if PhonePe or if Paytm, 197 Communications, that is the owner of Paytm, we can say. So if 197 Communications want to hire an internal ombudsman, so the internal ombudsman should not be connected with the company, should not be serving the company or should not be retired from the company. The internal ombudsman should be from a different entity. Okay. CIC having necessary skills. Now, if the person, you are hiring a person as an internal ombudsman, they must have the minimum experience of 7 years of working in areas such as banking, non-banking, finance, regulation, supervision, payment and settlement systems, credit information or consumer protection. So in these areas, the person should have the experience. So internal ombudsman shall previously not have been employed, nor presently be employed by the regulated entity who wants to hire that person. Okay. So internal ombudsman, if you want to hire XYZ as the internal ombudsman, so the XYZ should not have been previously or currently employed in your company or in the related parties of your company. Okay, so that means the internal, if you want to hire me, so I should not be connected to your company in any way before. Okay, so that is the idea. So internal ombudsman shall not be over 70 years of age before the completion of the tenure. So if you are hiring the internal ombudsman for 5 years, let's say, so the internal ombudsman shall not be over 70 years of age before the completion of the tenure of 5 years. So that is the idea. So regulated entity may appoint more than one internal ombudsman because the big banks or the big non-bank system participants, they might need more than one internal ombudsman depending on the volume of the complaints that are received by the company. So in case there are more than one internal ombudsman that is hired, so the regulated entity may clearly define the jurisdiction of the internal ombudsman. Okay. Now the appointment of deputy internal ombudsman. So deputy internal ombudsman, the regulated entity may appoint one or more deputy internal ombudsman depending on the complaints that are coming, okay, the volume of complaints. Now the DIO shall either be a retired or serving officer not below the rank of deputy general manager of another bank. So that means even in the case of deputy internal ombudsman, that person should not have been connected with your company. So that person should be either retired from some other bank or should be serving in some other bank. Then that person can also work as the internal ombudsman in your company. So DIO shall either be retired or serving officer not below the rank of deputy general manager of another bank or another CIC or another non-bank system participant or another NBFC having necessary skills and experience of minimum 5 years. So there is a difference in experience for internal ombudsman and the deputy internal ombudsman. For the deputy internal ombudsman, the experience required is of 5 years of working in areas such as banking, non-banking and such. Now the deputy internal ombudsman shall not be over 70 years of age before the completion of the tenure. Now the deputy internal ombudsman shall functionally report to the internal ombudsman, who will be the final authority. So internal ombudsman will be the final authority or decision making authority while dealing with the reviewed complaints or while dealing with the review. In the temporary absence of the internal ombudsman, let's say there is some wedding or there is some temporary absence that is required by the internal ombudsman, not exceeding a period of 15 working days, the DIO may function as the internal ombudsman for the limited time period. Okay. Now the prior information shall be provided to Consumer Education and Protection Department of the Reserve Bank of India in case of temporary absence of the IO is exceeding 15 working days. So in that case, the CPD department, the Consumer Education and Protection Department of RBI, has to be informed if the internal ombudsman is going on a leave or temporary absence of more than 15 days. Advising details of alternate arrangement and the entity has to inform the bank, or the non-bank system participant has to inform that what is the alternative arrangement if the internal ombudsman is going for more than 15 days. So what is the alternative arrangement being in place? However, such temporary actions should not exceed 30 days. So that is the idea. Now, tenure of the internal ombudsman and the deputy internal ombudsman. So till now, any confusion, anyone? So tenure of the internal ombudsman or deputy internal ombudsman shall not be less than 3 years but not exceeding 5 years. That means you can hire the internal ombudsman or the deputy internal ombudsman for 3 years, 4 years or 5 years. Minimum 3 years, maximum 5 years. The internal ombudsman or deputy internal ombudsman shall not be eligible for reappointment in any case, and in the appointment letter the timeline has to be mentioned, the tenure has to be mentioned. Okay, so reappointment cannot happen, and in the offer letter you have to mention that the internal ombudsman or deputy internal ombudsman are hired for what tenure, 3 years or 5 years or 4 years. The internal ombudsman or deputy internal ombudsman cannot be removed without the completion of their tenure. Without the approval of RBI, they cannot be removed from their position by the entity. In case the vacancy arises because the internal ombudsman has fallen ill, or there is some unforeseen circumstances that has happened, the internal ombudsman has died or something, in that case, the regulated entity shall inform the RBI within 10 working days from the date of such vacancy that there is terminal illness that has happened to the person and such. So in that case, within 10 days, the regulated entity has to inform the RBI, and the regulated entity shall appoint a new internal ombudsman or the deputy internal ombudsman within 3 months of the vacancy, as well as when the a new person has been hired as the internal ombudsman or the deputy internal ombudsman. So after the appointment, within 5 working days, the regulated entity has to report to the RBI about the new appointment. Okay, so first of all, the person, internal ombudsman or the deputy internal ombudsman, they cannot be removed before their completion without the approval of RBI. If something happens to the person, in that case, within 3 months, like within 10 days, first of all inform the RBI, and within 3 months hire a new person as the internal ombudsman or deputy internal ombudsman, whichever position has been vacated as per the given criteria. Within 3 months hire a new person, and after the hiring of the new person, within 5 working days inform the RBI that a new person has been hired. So that is the idea. Now, the regulated entity shall ensure that the post of the internal ombudsman does not remain vacant at any point of time, because let's say that you know that by next month the retirement will happen of the person will complete its tenure. So regulated entity knows that by the end of this year or by the end of next year, the person will retire. So regulated entity shall undertake the process of fresh appointment well in advance to fill the vacancy before the expiry of the tenure of the internal ombudsman, and ensure that a minimum overlap of at least 1 month should happen between the previous internal ombudsman and the new internal ombudsman, because the training is also required, right? So 1 month overlap should be there between the previous ombudsman and the new ombudsman. So if the internal ombudsman tenure is going to finish, so there should be a new internal ombudsman that should be hired in well advance, and there should be minimum 1 month overlap between the previous ombudsman and the new ombudsman. So regulated entity shall undertake the process of fresh appointment at least 3 months before the expiry of the tenure of the current internal ombudsman, because hiring a new person also requires time. Okay, so at least 3 months before the expiry of the tenure, the process should start for the hiring of the new internal ombudsman. Now, roles and responsibilities of the internal ombudsman. So first of all, internal ombudsman shall not handle complaints received directly from the complainants or members of the public. But so see, the internal ombudsman only has to review the rejected complaints, the wholly rejected complaints or partially rejected complaints. So directly the internal ombudsman cannot pick up the queries or complaints of the customers. Okay, so internal ombudsman only has to deal with the complaints that have already been examined by the regulated entity, but the complaint either has been wholly or partially rejected by the regulated entity. So first the regulated entity will review the complaint, and once there is the rejection of complaint that has happened, then this complaint will be transferred to the internal ombudsman. Okay. Now, some complaints cannot be looked after by the internal ombudsman, that is complaints related to corporate fraud, misappropriation, because these are not directly related to the consumer service. Okay. But except those resulting from deficiency in service, only these complaints can go to the internal ombudsman. The references in nature of suggestion, if the customers are giving suggestion to the regulated entity and the regulated entity has rejected the suggestion, then this will also not be reviewed by the internal ombudsman, because suggestions to be accepted or not to be accepted is under the purview of a regulated entity. Okay. However, service deficiencies in cases falling under the commercial decisions will be valid complaints, because it is related to deficiency in services. Complaints or references relating to internal administration, human resources and pay and emolument of staff. You cannot complain to the bank that okay, you are providing very less salaries to the employees, because that is not related to the services, right, that the bank is providing to you. So customers cannot customers, if they are raising the issue of the salaries of the staff, that you are providing too much salary or too less salary, so this, if the regulated entity is rejecting this complaint, that is correct. Internal ombudsman will not review this kind of suggestions or complaints. Okay. Complaints which have been decided by or are already pending in other fora such as Consumer Dispute Redressal Commission will not be reviewed by the internal ombudsman, because it is currently already in process in some different fora. Disputes for which remedy has been provided by the credit information companies, so for that also internal ombudsman will not review. Now, the internal ombudsman shall analyze the pattern of complaints such as let's say there are huge number of complaints that are coming in the home loan category. Okay, there are no complaints or very less complaints in the other categories like education loan, or very less complaints in the car loan, but there are huge number of complaints that are coming in home loan segment. In the home loan segment there is the huge number of complaints. That means there is some problem in the home loan category. So internal ombudsman shall analyze the pattern of complaints such as the category wise, the complaints are coming highest in home loan, consumer group wise, that is the highest complaints are coming from the farmers or from the businessman. So which consumer group is raising the highest of the complaints, that means the bank is not able to cater to that consumer group in a well manner. Geographical location, that from which area the maximum complaints are coming, that means the branches in that area are not able to work properly. So the internal ombudsman not only has to review but also has to analyze the complaints in the product or category wise, consumer group wise and geographical location wise, and suggest means for taking actions to address the root cause of the complaints of similar or repeated nature, that you have to resolve this issue. And this the internal ombudsman shall on a quarterly basis analyze the pattern of complaints that is received. The internal ombudsman shall furnish or provide the periodic reports including the analysis of the complaints on his or her activities to the committee of board handling the customer service and protection of the bank. Okay, so there is a committee of board in the bank handling customer service and protection. So the reports have to be provided to this committee of the board, preferably at quarterly intervals but not less than half-yearly interval. The regulated entity shall put in place a system for discussion of cases in which the decision of the internal ombudsman has been rejected. Now, let's say that the bank has rejected a complaint, internal ombudsman has said that this complaint should not be rejected and the bank has to resolve the complaint. Now, the bank, even after the internal ombudsman has said that this complaint is valid and should be resolved, still the bank is not resolving the complaint. So if the bank has rejected the decision of internal ombudsman, in that case there should be a discussion that should happen. Okay, so regulated entity shall put in place a system for discussion of cases in which the decision of the internal ombudsman has been rejected by the regulated entity by the customer. So discussion should happen with the customer service committee or consumer protection committee of the board of the regulated entity. And the internal ombudsman shall be designated as an ex officio member or a permanent invitee to the meeting of the committee of board of the bank of the regulated entity handling customer service and protection. Okay, so in the committee of board of the regulated entity, bank, the NBFC or such, So the committee of board of the regulated entity handling customer service and protection. So in that board, one position is for the internal ombudsman. Okay, so this is the idea. Now procedure for complaint. Now we are towards the end of the session. So procedure for complaint redressal by internal ombudsman. So regulated entity shall formulate a standard operating procedure approved by the committee of board handling customer service and protection, and internal ombudsman is a ex officio member of this committee or is a permanent invitee in this committee, that you have to remember. Now the regulated entity shall have a standard operating procedure and establish a fully automatic complaint management software wherein all the rejected complaints that are partly or wholly rejected by the regulated entity internal grievance redressal mechanism are auto escalated to the internal ombudsman within 20 days of receiving that complaint for a final decision from the internal ombudsman. So let's say you have received the complaint on 3rd of December. So within 20 days, if the complaint is rejected, so within 20 days the complaint has to be transferred to the internal ombudsman. Now the internal ombudsman and the regulated entity has to ensure that the final decision is communicated to the complainant within a period of 30 days. That means internal ombudsman will get the timeline of 10 days for the review of the complaint. Okay, so this is the idea, that internal ombudsman and regulated entity has to ensure that the final decision is communicated to the complainant within a period of 30 days from the date of receipt of the complaint by the regulated entity. So now this is the idea. We are at the last of the session. So supervisory oversight. So areas relating to customer service and customer grievance redressal as well as implementation of these directions. Regulated entities are implementing the directions. They are looking after the customer grievance or not. So there is the risk assessment and the supervisory review that is being done by the by the Department of Supervision of the Reserve Bank of India. Okay, so the banks, they are following the directions or not. So this will be looked after by the Department of Supervision of the Reserve Bank of India in case of regulated entity, that is a bank, NBFC and CIC. Now the non-banking system participants, are they following the directions? Are they looking after the customer grievances or not? So this will be reviewed, or supervisory review will be done by the Department of Payment and Settlement System of the RBI in case of the non-banking system participant, because the non-banking system participant come under the domain of the Payment and Settlement System Act. Okay, so for the master direction being followed or not by the banks, NBFC and CIC, the Department of Supervision of the RBI will look after it, and the NBSP, that is the non-banking system participants, are following the guidelines or not. This will be reviewed by the PSS Act, by the Payment of Settlement System, that is PSS, a department of the RBI. Okay. Now the Consumer Education and Protection Department of the RBI may review the cases where the decision of the internal ombudsman has been rejected. So first of all, the bank or the regulated entity rejected the complaint. Now the internal ombudsman said after review that this complaint should not be rejected, it is a valid complaint, but the regulated entity or the bank is not hearing to internal ombudsman, and still even after the review of the internal ombudsman that this complaint is valid, even after that the regulated entity has rejected the complaint. So in this case, if finally the bank has said after 30 days, within 30 days the bank has said that the RAM complaint is invalid, and the RAM is now going to the RBI ombudsman because the bank is not hearing. So RAM is going to the internal to the RBI ombudsman. So RAM is now going to the RBI ombudsman. Okay. So now what will happen, that the RBI ombudsman, so in this case the Consumer Education and Protection Department of the Reserve Bank may review the cases where the decision of the internal ombudsman has not been accepted by the regulated entity, and the aggrieved complainant, that is RAM here, approaches the RBI ombudsman for assessing the effectiveness of the internal grievance redressal mechanism. So if the bank is rejecting the rejecting the decision of the internal ombudsman and the aggrieved complainant goes to the RBI ombudsman, then the Consumer Education and Protection Department will see that why the bank has rejected it, why the bank is not hearing to the internal ombudsman. If the complaint is valid, so the whole of the internal grievance redressal system will be looked by the Consumer Education and Protection Department. So the banks, there is a responsibility of the banks. Now, if they are rejecting the complaint and the internal ombudsman is reviewing the complaint and is validating the complaint that the complaint is valid, even then the banks are not hearing to the complaint, then if the person goes to the RBI ombudsman, the CEPD will see, then the Consumer Education and Protection Department will then look after, will do a audit then that the whole of the internal grievance system, what is the problem with that of the bank and of the regulated entity. So regulated entity shall put in place a periodic reporting system. So the regulated entity shall put in place the periodic reporting of information to the Consumer Education and Protection Department of the Reserve Bank of India. So reporting should happen on a quarterly or on a annual basis, on the quarterly basis and on the annual basis as per format. Okay, so the regulated entities, they have to do the periodic reporting to the CEPD on the quarterly and annual basis, and these reports shall be submitted on or before the 10th day of the month following the quarter. So your quarter has finished, so after the finish of the quarter, by the 10th of the next month, by the 10th of the coming month, you will have to provide the report. Okay, and the report has to be provided on the quarterly and annual basis. Now all the other schemes have been repealed. Internal Ombudsman scheme for banks, Internal Ombudsman scheme for NBSP, Internal Ombudsman scheme for NBFC. So all those schemes have been repealed, and now we only have one Internal Ombudsman scheme for all the regulated entities as per the master direction that was released in December 2023. Now any confusion anyone has? Any confusion anyone has? So see, as I have asked the students that they want the scheme, so many of the students said that they want the schemes to be discussed again. So I am bringing the schemes one by one. So we have discussed the Internal Ombudsman scheme, then we will discuss PIDF, LRS, Integrated Ombudsman scheme also. So different schemes we are going to discuss in the coming sessions. Okay, so I will cater to, like, I will take the current affairs as well as we will be completing the schemes also. Okay, so scheme session are going to be a little lengthier, but we will be covering the whole idea of the scheme. Okay, so this is the question. I hope you will be easily able to answer this question. So this is the question regarding your Internal Ombudsman scheme. Now the second question is this. So as many of the students have said that yes, they want the scheme session, the RBI scheme session. So I will be discussing the RBI schemes in the sessions, in the Finance 360 sessions. Okay, so this is it for today. Any confusion anyone has? Any confusion anyone has? I hope you enjoyed today's session. Ma'am, if applicability, yes, it is said in the starting itself now that even if on a later date the applicability is ceasing, still the bank will have to follow it. Still the entities will have to follow it. Okay. So however, the scheme shall continue to be applicable even if the number of, so for the NBSPs, the even if the number of the prepaid or even if the number of wallets are decreasing, still the applicability will continue. And for the any regulated entity that is getting into the applicability on the later on date, they will have to follow the guidelines, they will have to follow the master action within 6 months of reaching the threshold. But and if a bank already has 10 or more banking outlets, the banks and the NBFCs usually expand only, otherwise they close down. So one of the two things happen. Okay, so that is the idea. Clear? Okay, so are you enjoying these sessions? Should I continue with the with these scheme sessions, or do you think that we should only do the current affairs session, because the schemes, it takes my time also, and it is usually lengthier sessions that will happen for the schemes, because the schemes are very lengthy and I have to come up with all the data points so that you are getting a complete understanding of the scheme. So do you want, like, do tell me in the comment section that do you want these lengthy sessions, or you do not want the lengthy sessions of the scheme, or should I divide the scheme in 2 sessions? That also we can do, that if you do not want to see one lengthy session of a scheme, we can divide the scheme in 2 sessions. Okay, so do tell me that in the comment section. So this is it from my end. Thank you everyone. Thank you for joining.